Hi there. This is modern day 50-year-old Sarah coming to you. And if you don't recognize the background behind me, don't worry. This is not another house that I own. I am in New York, and I'm in New York for a friend of mine's book launch. It's called Invincible: Defy Your Genetic Destiny and Live Longer, Stronger, something like that. It's by Florence Comite. You should go pre-order it and buy it now. It's incredible. It's like Atomic Habits for the Fountain of Youth. It comes out uh, April 28th. I'm not going to say tomorrow because I don't know when you watch this. And I'm in New York for this launch, which is why I am in a house that's not mine. But I wanted to still record this video now. It's a reaction video to the Tony Hsieh PandoMonthly, which I have been putting off watching. I have done them all out of order, and because I've been putting this one off for forever for obvious reasons. And I finally got through it, and I had enough semi-liquid courage, finished it, and I thought I am going to do this while I have the fortitude to do it. So I think it's kind of obvious to some people why this is a hard one for me to watch. Uh, the most obvious reason is that Tony's died a really tragic death, and seeing him again, seeing us interacting again would have been hard at any time. But the reason this one in particular was difficult is this was the Panda Monthly I hated the most. Out of 60 Panda Monthlies, I hated this one the most. Everyone who always said, "What was your favorite Panda Monthly?" I often said Ben Horowitz. Sometimes I said some of the others. There were several that I really loved. Naval's is really good. I mean, I also loved Elon's. I thought there were a lot that were really, really good, and it kind of been. I remember Ben Laris was really funny. I just watched it. I mean, I guess sometimes it kind of like an author. It's like your last book's always your favorite. I always had a lot of favorites, but I never ever had a different answer for what was the one I liked the least. It always was this one. And the reason I didn't like this one is because Tony and I were in a very adversarial place when I did this interview. He was doing the downtown project, and uh, I was spending a lot of time in downtown Vegas at the time. Paul's company was based there. Paul and I were not dating, we were friends. My then husband was doing like a photography project as part of the downtown project and had an apartment there. So the my one child then and I were shuttling back and forth. I was pregnant during part of it, shuttling back and forth. So for Tony, I had the disadvantage of being one of the few journalists who was half living in the downtown project. And for every other journalist at the time, Fortune, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, everyone else would come there for 24 hours. They would get very dazzled by the downtown project. And they would write these amazing, glowing stories about this guy who was writing, who was spending $350 million of his own money to make this place the community center of the world. And you could really spend 24 hours there and have nothing but an amazing perspective of what was happening. But if you were living there half time, you really got a picture of what was the complex story. And it wasn't just because of living there, but it was because you got to know everyone. You heard from the people who had lived in Vegas before he decided he was remaking downtown Vegas. And those people didn't elect him mayor of downtown Vegas. Those people did not opt to live inside his startup. Um, there were also the people who worked at Zappos who lived in Henderson and had gone to work at a company that was based in Henderson, who did not really want to go then work at a company based in downtown. And when I asked Tony in this video about, people who were now coming to work in downtown Vegas, and they were like, there's not enough security. And he was like, well, I mean, there wasn't when we were in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. Well, but yes, but people were joining a company they knew was based in the Tenderloin. That's not what they opted into when they took this job. So, he really ripped the rug out of a lot of people on many metrics. And I don't think, these stories were always understood by people who would come in for 24 hours, these national journalists, and would do the wow, altruist do it, but putting $350 million of his own money into this, project. And I think as a journalist who was dedicated to the truth, who was seeing this from the inside, who was talking to a lot of people who were really frustrated, both people inside Downtown Project and lived in Vegas outside the Downtown Project, who was about to have him on a stage. I felt a lot of pressure and a lot of obligation to be a high profile journalist who could hold him to account. And I think I was also pissed, to be quite honest. I think I saw, and I see this knowing everything we know about Tony now. I think I see this in retrospect in this video. I think Tony was starting to slip into a place where he was surrounded by yes people. And I think I was pissed he wasn't paying attention. And I think he wasn't paying attention to how his actions were impacting people. And I don't think that was the person that I knew. I remember when I first, so when I first got to be friends with Tony, I wrote something like really stupid on my personal blog with saralacy.com at the time, which like had no traffic. It wasn't even on TechCrunch. It wasn't on Business Week. It wasn't even anything big. And I wrote something after the dot-com crash when Zappos was running commercials. And I was like, why? This is so stupid. It's dot-com after the dot-com crash. What dot-com is running commercials? And it was such a throwaway thing. And he read it. I don't even know how he saw it. And he was like, I'd love to be able to talk to you about why, the economics of why we're running commercials. That was how we got to be friends. And I remember being on a rooftop at like Majul in the Mission, and he was like telling me about customer service and like why they had people on staff and like how a customer service person would stay on the phone with you forever. And he's like, call a customer service person right now, ask them anything, talk to them, ask them to order you pizza. I don't care what. And I called them and I thought it was such a gimmick. As I was like, you bet you do this with every journalist. This is so stupid. And I called them and I was like, I started talking to them. And then midway through it, I just hung up because I was like, this is so stupid. You've probably queued this up. This is a gimmick you always do. And I hung up midway through it because I was like, this is a stupid gimmick. And he got so angry that I hung up. And I saw in his face, it wasn't angry. I wasn't going along with the gimmick. He got hurt and angry that I hung up on one of his employees and that I'd like damaged this person because they were a real person. I'd hung up on them. And it was this weird thing where I was like, oh, you don't actually see this person as a cog. This is like, you're mad at me that I disrespected this person. You're not mad I run this bit. You're mad at me I disrespected this person. And it was such a moment where I saw in Tony, like, you're fundamentally different than anyone I've ever known who's built a tech company. And like that was a new baseline that like shaped how I thought about him. And um and what I saw in this video and when you see my frustration in this video when we're talking about Vegas, you see question after question. I think I bring up very legitimate concerns and he's brushing them off. They are water off a duck's back. They're water off a duck's back. And you even see at the end, I say, I brought up a lot of legitimate concerns. None of them seem to worry you. What does worry you? And he's like, well, I mean, all of it worries me. If we get this wrong, it's 100-year problem. It's 100-year problem, or there may 30-year problem. Maybe misremember, but it's a 30-year problem, and it's a city And I just know that, like, even after this video, and after this moment, he then does like holacracy, which is this whole philosophy of management of you have circles, no one's in charge, anyone can start a circle. And we were even more critical of that. Paul Carr wrote a famous Pando piece called Holacracy of Dunces, where he did a lot of reporting of how unhappy everyone was about it with Zappos. He ripped people the rug out from people even more. And he was like, well, look, I'll give you money to quit. And it's like, how many companies of the size of Zappos are there in Las Vegas? Are you giving them an option? And it was a real rift in Paul and Tony's friendship. And there was a point at which they talked about it later, and Tony was like, "Look, whether or not this is long term where this goes, I think this is where the world is going. I think holacracy is where management will go long term. And if it doesn't work now, it doesn't work now." And it's that this whole thing of you got to break eggs to make an omelet. And like the guy who was furious at me for hanging up on one person at a call center gave a shit about a broken egg. And like, I think the reason I'm so pissed in this interview, and I think the reason I got off stage and never wanted to watch this interview again and hated it and always hated it more than any other Panda Monthly, was like underneath it all, I sensed there was something changing, and not changing in him, because I think everything he was trying to do in Vegas really was wanting to leave it a better place. And, and I just think there's an isolation that comes with extreme wealth. And there's an isolation of being surrounded by yes men and yes people. And there was always a thing where, like, in the Dustin Moskovitz Monthly, he talked about like this role he played with both Mark Zuckerberg and Justin Rosenstein of being this grounding planet who kept both of them from veering into the stratosphere. And Alfred Lin very much was always that for Tony. And after they sold Zappos and Tony was like, let's do this for Vegas, Alfred was like, I'm gonna go be a partner for Sequoia. Alfred didn't sign up for this adventure with Tony. Alfred has since become number one on the Midas list. He's done extraordinarily well in that role. Um, I don't think Tony had that grounding force, and I think Tony's a genius, but I don't think he had that grounding force. And I think I think what you see in me in this video is I am frustrated that I'm trying to get across to him that real people are upset about what he's doing. And he keeps saying he's doing something for the community, and he's not listening to what the community's saying. And there's points at which I'm saying things like, there's very real contradictions. Like he's saying, I wanted to do this because I spent time in downtown Vegas and I loved it, but now let me change it. And I'm like, well, which is it? Do you love it as it is, or do you want to change it? And then he's like, well, I love all the people here, but I'm spending all this money to bring people in. And I'm like, well, which is it? Are you building this for the people here? Or are you building it for the people you're trying to bring here? And he's like, both. And then but I do think, and this is something that was unfair to Tony, but I do think it wound up being a harbinger of what we would see with the role type people have begun to play in government now, 14 years later. Um, and I was there at the very beginning of the downtown project. This guy, very soft spoken, sweet, genuinely well intentioned guy, rolls in to what is really an economically disadvantaged area with $350 million of his own money, and is like, hey, let's roll. I remember being at like a First Friday, and like people approached him as if he was a messianic figure. Like people approached him as if like he was a small Jesus of Vegas. Like people really treated him as if he was some sort of second coming. And he, people had this sense of like sort of semi worship of him. By the time I did this interview, a lot of the local outside of the downtown project view of him had changed. And a lot of the anger, and I actually read out in this interview a local newspaper's view of him. And it was like, you haven't solved homelessness. You haven't done this. You haven't provided social services. And it's like, people seem to really confuse him with being the mayor. And they're like, you said you were going to do all this. Why haven't you done these things? And it's like, and I don't, and I have sympathy for Tony in that. Like, Tony was very clear. He was moving his company downtown. He was making a capitalist bet that this would make his company more productive in being there. He was buying real estate. He was bringing startups there. He was clear he was not being uncapitalist about this. But somehow people confused him with being a mayor of downtown and were angry when he did not provide social services, which again, he also said he was going to be providing healthcare and a school. There were so many muddied waters and muddied messages. And this is the messiness when you decide you're buying a city, which is effectively what he did. And he said this city is a startup. And when a city is a startup, you've got two problems. When your priorities aren't the city gets pissed. And then other people have decided they didn't opt into your startup. So then Tony says a lot of things in this video, like startups are misunderstood in the first 5, 10 years. Things are messy in a startup. Well, a guy living in Fremont Street, like who did not vote for you, who did not say, I'm opting into the startup of Tony Hsieh, like that doesn't work. And then, you see this in the small municipal level in this interview where it looks like perhaps to some people, I'm being a raging bitch and racking him over the coals on this. But then we fast forward to Elon Musk running Doge. We fast forward to the way tech people have really, bought Series A, Series B, Series C shares in the government of America and are running quite a lot of it. And people are saying, wait, how have we wound up in the startup of America? And did we opt into this? It was sort of the municipal level of that. Only I would argue Tony really was trying to do stuff for the community. He just kind of had the mentality of you can break eggs. And most politicians and statesmen can't break eggs. Like they won't get elected if they break eggs. I just remember like it's a like weird analogy, but like when Carly Fiorina bought Compaq, when she was at HP and she bought Compaq, and people were furious about it. I remember going to that shareholder meeting and her being like, this isn't a democracy. I don't care. As long as I have a slight majority, we're doing this, bitches. It's not an election. And it's like, that's capitalism. And what Tony shows in this video is there is a difference between startups and a city. There's a difference between startups and municipal government. There's a lot of conversations where people are like, wait, do any of you have any experience in urban planning? And he's like, no. And we're like, is that a good idea? And he's like, don't care. It's like there just are differences in the startup mentality, and he doesn't care, and no one elected him. And then we get to the point where that becomes a big part of the federal government. Interesting harbinger. We will leave it at that. As I often say in these videos, here we are. Um, before any of those issues, before I start being quite hard on him, Talk about some of the early days of Zappos. One of my favorite moments, which I'd forgotten about, is his earliest foray into entrepreneurship. We talk about his worm farm he did in his youth, where he thought he could just cut worms in half and double his inventory and didn't realize that worms died. And then he left the bin open on the worms and they all ran away. I just love that's like a rare time Tony Hsieh failed. It and then but he really does this is one thing that I love that again, it's only one of those things you see in retrospect. Everyone at the time, even where I sat with seeing some of the challenges with downtown Vegas, everyone thought the thing that Tony Hsieh was so good at was culture, right? Because Vegas was known. I mean, sorry, Zappos was known for having the greatest culture. That was what Amazon bought them for, right? That was Amazon bought them and didn't fuck with them because they were like, we can learn things from you about culture, right? That was what delivering happiness was built about, bought about. That was, the whole thing. And it was interesting because I've so often noticed the things that make an entrepreneur successful are also their downfall. And so much of that obsession with culture was born out of Link Exchange. And he talks about that a lot in this video. Link Exchange, they didn't pay attention to culture. And he talks about how it grew so fast. He and Alfred hired their friends and they ran out of friends and they didn't know how to hire people. And so they just hired a bunch of people. And then they turned down like two, three uh, acquisition offers. One was $20 million to sell to Yahoo. And he has this great moment where it's like 1997. And he's like, we can't sell because there'll never be another 1997. And I do always think people who weren't in the valley in the dot-com bubble don't understand it will never be another time like that. People always say it's just like the dot com. No, it was just a singular time when the internet was being created, and I will grandma die on that hill. And one day there will be people who are right now in the AI bubble who will grandma die on that hill to people 30 years, you know, our junior. At any rate, he did finally sell, and the biggest reason he sold to Microsoft is he hated the culture. And he actually left his shares unvested. He left money on the table because he hated going to work, because he hated the culture that he had built. It's fascinating when you then fast forward to Amazon, one of the only acquisitions I've ever covered. And I'm going to caveat this. Part of this is with the exception of Instagram, but I'm caveat it. One of the only acquisitions I've ever covered where they kept the promises of keeping the company independent, um, and keeping the management in charge. Um, Probably the first one I ever saw that did. Um, Now, where it strays from Instagram is, it really kept the spirit of the company in charge. And I think, you know, Tony really still felt like it represented what Zappos was. We're going to have a Panda Monthly with Kevin Systrom soon. Um, but in years since, Kevin Systrom has really retreated from public life. You've not heard a lot in recent years about Kevin Systrom waving a Facebook flag. I would love to hear what he thinks about what has happened to Instagram since he sold to Facebook, and does he regret that move or not? Um, but they have kept it independent. They did keep, it has been one of those ones. It has both deals like Zappos, deals like Instagram, deals like WhatsApp, deals like YouTube with Google. This was not the norm. Almost never, Macromedia, Adobe, almost never though did companies stay independent and did companies keep the promise of keeping companies independent. It was very rare. And there's an amazing point in this interview, and Tony's very political in how he talks about it, but Tony had a lot of friction with his board. They really wanted him to sell, and he really didn't want to. And ultimately, when Bezos came back for like the second or third time and was like, I'll sell on any terms, Tony talks about in this video how actually Bezos offered him more independence and basically terms to be a better board member than his venture capitalists. Um, and so it was a rare case where selling would give him more freedom to continue building the company he wanted to the way he did than staying independent with his VCs, which is a fascinating part of this interview. What else did I want to mention? I've talked quite a lot. I don't want to go on too long, as always. Um, he has a great part where he talks about entrepreneurship was his like hack, his way to rebel against the path that his parents had laid out for him on like Asian American achievement. And he watched MacGyver growing up and wanted to be MacGyver, and it was his way of being a profitable MacGyver, which was adorable. You know, he always wanted to live in a suspended college. You know, he talked about this like, and I saw this. We like all lived in this high rise in downtown Vegas, called the Ogden, and it was like they all had these. Like he owned several floors of it, and like my family had a apartment part time in one of them, and it was like, and it was not only like we all had floors, like apartments on these floors, but they all had marker boards on it. Like you could be like, hey girl. And I was like, and it's like he really reveled with it being like college. And I asked him in this interview, like, what is it that you love so much about college that you're reliving it? And he's like, it's not that I love college, it's that I love the like collisions, the spontaneity, and like, and I think that's true, but I also think he loved that. And I think he was someone who didn't ever want to be alone. And like Paul wrote about this at the time of his death. Um, and you can Google it. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. Uh, I think that was part of his, and I think it's not a coincidence that he spiraled more after COVID. I don't think he was someone okay being alone. And I think he brought part of that genius to bear for the sake of Vegas with collisions and with bringing more people and with serendipity and like 100%. We all know like that's what makes like Silicon Valley what it is. People happen to run into each other, companies result. And I think part of the thing he talks about here of like how he evolved his thinking of making everyone move to Vegas versus can people like subscribe to Vegas and spend time there. And it's like, you know, look, he doesn't, he obviously, he says at one point in this video, in 5 years, people are going to look back on downtown Vegas and it's going to be like how people thought about Facebook in 5 years. Well, like, none of us are looking back on Vegas and saying, wow, it's like Facebook, obviously. But he did leave downtown Vegas better than he found it. I mean, I don't know if you went to downtown Vegas before Tony or after, but like the Writer's Block, one of the most beautiful independent bookstores I've ever gone to. Some of the murals, some of the art, the Life is Beautiful festival. I mean, eat like this one of the most best my favorite like breakfast places like they're like beautiful beautiful things he invested in and created, and people who had like lifelong dreams to do things who never would have been able to do them that he made possible. Like he left that place better than he found it, even if it didn't do what he wanted to do. But I'm not there day in and day out. I don't know what people's read on is of that $350 million. You know, Remotive, one of the companies he mentions in the video, has become Zipline. It's still a hugely valuable, like more than $1 billion company. I know there's companies he funded out of that fund that have still been super valuable. So I would love someone who has actually been there, stayed there to watch this video and tell me what percentage of what he talks about played out and how they feel watching it. Do they feel like they watch it? Like, you know, we talked about the Ben Lara video. It's like, yeah, your vision didn't play out, but no one's media vision played out. Is it that how they feel? Or are they pissed and they feel like he was out of touch? Um, I don't know. I think unfortunately I watch this and I see someone who had the best intentions and the best heart. And one of the most telling things is when I say, why are you putting $350 million of your own money in this? And he goes, well, it's not my money, it's my time. And what he valued more than his own money was his time. And he really did put every ounce of his time in this. He believed it and he wanted it more than anything. And, this wasn't about power and it wasn't about ego. He really loved this community and he really wanted it to be this utopia. And I think he had every positive intention in the world. And I think it was what, like, look, when I help people write books, I work with a lot of really powerful, wealthy people. And one of the reasons that a lot of them hire me is they believe I'll tell them the truth, and they're surrounded by people who won't tell them the truth. And I think you reach a certain point of wealth and power where people won't tell you the truth anymore. And I think sadly, what I see in this video is someone who's at that precipice where people stop telling him the truth. And I think that became a bigger problem. But I don't know. I can't say that I'm thrilled. I say with so many of these videos, like with Peter, there were 4 videos I didn't want to watch. This is the second, no, yeah, this is the second one. Peter was the first one. This was the second one. With the Peter one, I was like, oh, it's painful to see our friendship. It's painful to see us laughing and that, but I'm glad it was captured. I'm glad people who think Peter's this two-dimensional character don't understand him, can see sort of the person he was several years ago. I don't know if I'm glad this is captured. I don't know anything, but um it's done and I watched it and it's up and I miss Tony and I wish whatever trajectories captured on this had not continued. But I miss him and I love him and I think he had the best intentions for Vegas. And I think he left Vegas better than he found it. And I hope people who live there feel that way. Up next in San Francisco Pando Monthlies is Naval Ravikant, who I don't have quite as emotional fraught feelings about, and I know is a fan favorite. But up next in LA Pando Monthlies is Elon Musk, one of the other 4 that I don't want to watch, but we will get through it together. And then the fourth horseman of the ones I don't want to revisit is Mark Andreessen, who doesn't come up for a while. So we will then be fine for a bit. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I will see you with either Elon or Naval, whichever one I can get through next.